Miss Safiya, if you love yourself, turn back. 12 came before you.
12 Maids. In 12 agonizing months, the most lethal crime boss in Seoul had thrown 12 terrified housekeepers out into the rain. Neurologists, private physicians, and high-priced specialists had exhausted every option. Sedatives, soundproofing, experimental nerve treatments. Nothing could silence the relentless ringing in his head. Ever since a near-fatal car bombing shredded his nervous system, Sang-soon lived trapped in an excruciating state of hypervigilance. The Golden Viper syndicate ruler ruled the city's underworld with cold brutality, but behind the reinforced steel doors of his luxury penthouse, even the vibration of an unpadded footstep or the clink of silverware felt like a detonating grenade. The estate had become a soundproof tomb of pure dread. Staff trembled behind closed doors. Seasoned bodyguards winced at his shadow. No one lasted more than a few weeks under his suffocating surveillance. The head butler was down to his final warning: find someone who could survive the master's impossible demands or share the fate of the 12 before them. Before we reveal what happened next, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling chapter. Desperate to avoid disaster, the butler brought in Safiya, a quiet immigrant housekeeper known not for brute obedience, but for an uncanny, methodical calm. She didn't flinch at Sang-soon's towering fury. She didn't cower when his dark eyes narrowed in lethal suspicion. Where others saw a monster waiting to snap, Safiya recognized a man drowning in sensory overload. On her very first evening, while the rest of the mansion held its breath, anticipating another violent dismissal, she did the unthinkable. She bypassed his security perimeter, dimmed the blinding glare of the skyline, and approached his bedside without making a single sound. When the head butler and the executive housekeeper crept toward the master suite the following morning, bracing for another disaster, the scene inside left them paralyzed in the doorway. The ruthless kingpin of Seoul was kneeling inches from the new maid, eyes wide in absolute shock, as Safiya steadily offered him a simple glass of water, and for the first time in years, the room was wrapped in total, unbroken silence. Down at the docks of Incheon and across the rain-slicked container terminals of Seoul, a single whisper of Sang-sun's name commanded absolute submission. As the head of the Golden Viper syndicate, he controlled the pulse of the country's black market with calculating precision. Rivals who dared encroach on his shipping lanes vanished into the harbor before sunrise, and even high-ranking officials kept their heads bowed in his presence. To the outside world, Sang-sun was an apex predator carved from ice and iron. Behind the reinforced titanium doors of his triplex penthouse, however, he was a prisoner of his own shattered senses. 18 months earlier, a car bomb packed with military-grade explosives had ripped through his armored sedan. He had survived the inferno, but the concussive blast had permanently altered the wiring of his brain. The trauma left him with severe hyperacusis and debilitating sensory hypersensitivity. To Sang-sun, the world no longer had a normal volume setting. The hum of an air conditioning unit felt like the low growl of an incoming storm. The sudden squeak of rubber soles against polished marble sounded like screeching metal. Even the rhythmic flicker of a fluorescent light bulb could trigger blinding migraines and visceral fight-or-flight panic. To cope, he had transformed his multi-million-dollar sanctuary into a soundproof tomb. Thick acoustic paneling lined the walls, and the massive floor-to-ceiling windows were double-glazed with ballistic, noise-deadening glass, muting the neon sprawl of the city below. Every surface was draped in heavy velvet or dense carpets designed to swallow sound whole. Yet the quiet offered no peace. In the dead stillness, Sang-sun's paranoia only sharpened, feeding off every subtle intrusion. The estate operated under a reign of terror. Staff members moved like ghosts, speaking in suffocated whispers and stripping off their shoes at the door to pad across the floorboards in thick felt socks. No one dared wear perfume, let alone run water too loudly or tap a spoon against a porcelain saucer. The air was permanently thick, with an electric tension so oppressive that seasoned guards broke down in tears after 12-hour shift. Every room was monitored by high-definition cameras, with Sang-sun watching from the shadows like a coiled viper. The slightest misstep, a brushed lamp cord, an uneven breath, a fallen piece of cutlery, was met with cold, instantaneous fury. 12 maids had entered this silent fortress, believing they could endure the isolation, and all 12 had left in disgrace, escorted out under armed guard after breaking under the impossible strain. The penthouse had become an inescapable cage where terror and silence ruled in equal, lethal measure. Head butler Kang wiped a bead of cold sweat from his brow as he stared at the personnel file on his mahogany desk. His hands, usually steady after 30 years of serving underworld royalty, subtly trembled. The dismissal of the 12th maid had pushed Sang-sun to the brink of complete isolation, and Kang knew the syndicate boss would not tolerate another failure. He was no longer just hiring domestic help, he was searching for a miracle to keep the estate from collapsing under sheer madness. Enter Safiya, an immigrant housekeeper who had quietly worked in the private residences of foreign diplomats and private clinics across Seoul. Safiya possessed a reputation that bordered on myth. She was renowned for an uncanny, almost unnatural composure, having mastered traditional herbal remedies and sensory grounding techniques passed down through generations. When Kang extended the offer, with a salary that could change a family's fortune overnight, she accepted without a flicker of hesitation. Yet the moment she stepped through the reinforced staff entrance of the penthouse, the atmosphere inside hit her like a suffocating wall of dread. The senior staff gathered in the dim service corridor, their eyes wide with anxious pity. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Lim, immediately pulled Safiya aside into a cramped linen alcove, speaking in a frantic, barely audible murmur. She warned Safiya that this was no ordinary luxury estate. It was a minefield. "Listen to me carefully," Mrs. Lim whispered, her voice tight with terror. "Do not look him in the eyes. Do not make a sound when you set down a tray. If you drop so much as a button on the carpet, you will be thrown into the street before it stops rolling. Mr. Sang-sun does not give second chances. He is a demon in human skin, and the silence here will drive you insane before he does." 2 security guards standing watch nodded in grim solidarity, visibly tense even behind the soundproof partition. They had watched grown men collapse under Sang-sun's suffocating glare, and to them, this soft-spoken newcomer was merely the 13th lamb being led to slaughter. Safiya listened attentively, her warm amber eyes steady and undisturbed. She smoothed the crisp folds of her deep burgundy uniform and adjusted her white collar without a trace of the panic vibrating through the hallway. She did not scoff at their warnings, nor did she let their fear bleed into her pulse. Where the staff saw a lethal monster waiting to tear someone apart, Safiya heard the unmistakable signs of a wounded man trapped in a storm of agonizing overstimulation. She knew the human nervous system well, its fragile thresholds, its violent defenses, and how easily pain could wear the mask of cruelty. With a quiet nod and a reassuring, centered breath, she picked up her specialized kit. While the rest of the mansion held its breath, Safiya turned toward the master wing, completely ready to step into the Viper's lair.
The double doors to the master suite slid open with a faint hiss of pneumatic seals, admitting Safiya into the inner sanctum. The air inside was heavy, stale, and freezing cold. Across the sprawling expanse of the bedroom, the towering glass windows framed the glittering chaos of Seoul's skyline, a dazzling sea of neon that cut across the darkened room like sharp shards of glass. In the center of the shadows, half submerged in the gloom of his massive bed, sat Sang-sun. His dark silk shirt hung unbuttoned, exposing a lean, tense frame coiled like a spring. His knuckles were white against the charcoal sheets, his dark eyes narrowed in immediate, lethal suspicion as he tracked her every move. Previous maids would have dropped to their knees or backed away with frantic apologies. Safiya did neither. She did not freeze, nor did she rush. Moving with the fluid grace of someone walking on thin ice, she took in the room's hidden battleground. She noticed instantly what others had missed: the subtle, high-pitched resonance vibrating from a loose vent cover, the abrasive glare of a bedside lamp reflecting off a polished marble pillar, and the sharp chemical tang of synthetic sanitizers lingering in the stale air. Without breaking the silence, Safiya went to work. She knelt near the wall, using a thick, felt-lined tool to tighten the loose vent, instantly deadening the grating rattle that had been chewing at Sang-sun's temples for hours. Next, she drew the sheer acoustic drapery across the city view, softening the violent neon glare into a muted amber glow that ceased to pierce the dark. She did not avert her gaze in terror. Instead, her posture remained grounded, projecting an unwavering aura of absolute safety. From her tray, she retrieved a ceramic flask wrapped in heat-insulating cloth. She had steeped a blend of dried chamomile, skullcap, and crushed passion flower, an ancient infusion formulated not to drug the mind, but to gently disarm the body's hyperactive autonomic nervous system. Safiya lowered herself to the plush carpet beside the bed, sinking to one knee with deliberate, silent precision. She cradled the warm glass with a soft cloth to eliminate any sudden temperature shock. Looking straight into the dark, exhausted eyes of the syndicate boss, she held the soothing steam toward him. She did not utter a single word of forced deference. Instead, she offered the quiet gift of an untroubled presence, bridging the lethal distance between them as the scent of wild herbs gently neutralized the tension in the air. For the first time in 18 months, the suffocating pressure behind Sang-sun's temples began to retreat. The following afternoon, the heavy oak doors of the private study clicked shut, sealing Safiya inside with the apex predator of Seoul's underworld. Sang-sun did not look like a man seeking peace. He paced behind his obsidian desk, the silhouette of his broad shoulders framed by the brooding gray sky outside. When he turned to face her, the aura radiating from him was suffocating, a cold, violent pressure that had forced hardened cartel captains to beg for mercy. "You think you're clever," Sang-sun said, his voice a low, raspy growl that cut through the silence like a serrated blade. He stepped out from behind the desk, closing the distance between them with deliberate predatory intent until he was towering over her. "You walk in here pretending this is ordinary. You touch things you shouldn't. You look at me as if you have a right to be here." He leaned down, his dark eyes burning with ruthless intensity, waiting for the familiar signs, the quickening pulse at the throat, the averted eyes, the frantic step backward. Safiya did not move an inch. Her breathing remained rhythmic and slow, her hands resting calmly in front of her crisp burgundy uniform. She met his lethal glare not with defiance, but with a profound, unyielding clarity.
"I do not think I am clever, sir," she replied, her voice soft, steady, and entirely free of tremor. "I only see what is plainly before me." Sang-sun scoffed, a dangerous edge sharpening his tone. "And what do you think you see? A murderer? A madman?" "I see a man whose body is constantly preparing for a bomb that already went off," Safiya said calmly. The silence that followed was deafening. A muscle in Sang-sun's jaw twitched. "Your eyes are inflamed because the lighting in this room forces your pupils to overcompensate. Your jaw is locked because the low-frequency hum from your ventilation system keeps your nervous system in a permanent state of fight or flight. You are not angry with the staff because they are incompetent, Mr. Sang-sun. You are in agonizing pain because every sound feels like a physical blow to your skull." For the first time in his life, the boss of the Golden Viper Syndicate stood entirely paralyzed. No doctor, no bodyguard, and certainly no servant had ever dared to name his invisible wound aloud, let alone strip away the armor of his terrifying reputation with such unflinching grace. "I am not here to fear you," Safiya added gently, maintaining that unshakable stare. "I am here to give you back your peace. If you wish to fire me for that, call the guards now." Sang-sun stared down at her, his fists slowly unclenching as the heavy, frantic racing of his own heart began to slow in her presence.
In the sub-level executive suites of the Golden Viper Tower, Chief of Operations Han Jin-woo watched a bank of silent surveillance monitors with mounting unease. For the past 12 months, everything had unfolded according to his meticulous design. It was Jin-woo who had arranged the high turnover rate among the penthouse domestic staff, deliberately exploiting Sang-sun's sensory trauma. By orchestrating a constant revolving door of nervous, clumsy maids, he had kept his boss perpetually on the edge of psychosis, drowning in migraines, isolated from his lieutenants, and unable to manage the syndicate's daily operations. In that deliberate vacuum of power, Jin-woo had thrived. He had siphoned hundreds of millions of won into offshore accounts and forged secret treaties with a rival cartel across the Yellow Sea, setting the stage to step forward as the rational, undisputed savior of the organization. The only remaining step was to place his own operative inside the penthouse to finish the job under the guise of an accidental overdose. Instead, the screen before him showed an impossible reality. Sang-sun was not raging. He was not smashing crystal decanters against the marble or firing staff in the dead of night. For the third consecutive day, the syndicate boss sat calmly at his desk, reviewing maritime trade manifests, his hands steady, his posture relaxed, and the dark circles beneath his eyes noticeably fading. Standing quietly by the side console was Safiya, methodically replacing his tea with another fragrant herbal brew. A cold, venomous fury tightened in Jin-woo's chest. The new maid was not just surviving, she was systematically dismantling the neurological trap that kept Sang-sun paralyzed. If the syndicate leader regained his full, razor-sharp focus, he would audit the port manifests within days. The discrepancies, the diverted shipments, the hidden accounts, all of it would be laid bare. Jin-woo slammed his palm against the console, turning toward his two most ruthless enforcers waiting in the shadows of the office. "The timeline moves up," Jin-woo said, his voice dropping into a harsh, hurried whisper. "We can no longer wait to slip an assassin in quietly. She has undone months of work in less than a week." He tapped a key on the terminal, bringing up the architectural blueprints of the triplex penthouse, highlighting the emergency power grid and the blind spots in the soundproofing. "Tonight, we cut the main breakers to the penthouse. When the grid goes dark and the alarms are scrambled, take a tactical team in through the service lift. Eliminate Sang-sun.
and make sure that immigrant maid dies first.
At 2 a.m., the entire penthouse plummeted into total, suffocating darkness. The abrupt electrical surge threw the triplex off the main grid, cutting the climate control with an ominous hiss. In the master suite, the sudden screeching drone of the emergency backup generators detonated in Song Sun's ears like a mortar shell. The violent shift in ambient pressure and the discordant mechanical whine instantly triggered his trauma, sending blinding white-hot agony ripping through his skull. Song Sun dropped to his knees beside the bed, clutching his temples as his vision blurred into fractured static. His pulse hammered violently against his ribs. He reached blindly toward his nightstand for his sidearm, but his equilibrium was shattered. His fingers fumbled against the polished wood as nausea swept over him. In the corridor beyond, the muffled thump of tactical boots and the faint click of suppressed carbines echoed through the vents. The strike team was inside. Before the panic could pull him under, a steady, warm hand gripped his wrist. "Breathe, Mr. Sung Sun," Safiya's voice whispered in his ear, a calm, immovable anchor in the blackness. "4 counts in, 4 counts out. Focus only on my voice." She had not panicked when the lights failed. Having spent days mapping every corner, every carpet seam, and every acoustic dead zone in the sprawling estate, the darkness was her domain. She slid his weapon into her trembling palm, closing his fingers firmly around the grip, grounding him with her unshakable pulse. 4 armed men entered through the freight shaft, she murmured, her tone as measured as if she were reading a ledger. "They are clearing the east wing. The ventilation shafts carry their footsteps directly to the gallery, but this corridor has thick wool padding beneath the floorboards. They cannot hear us move, and they do not know the blind spots." Song Sun leaned on her shoulder as she hoisted him to his feet. With each rhythmic breath she guided him through, the crushing ringing in his ears receded, just enough for his lethal instincts to resurface. Safiya led him through the pitch-black hallway with flawless precision, navigating the maze of soundproof partitions without brushing against a single wall. She bypassed the open foyer where the red laser sights of the hitmen swept across the artwork, guiding him instead through a concealed service corridor that opened directly into the commercial kitchen. As the 2 lead assassins crept toward the master suite, unaware they had been outflanked, Song Sun's breathing leveled out. In the deep shadows beside the industrial prep station, the syndicate boss looked down at the woman who had guided him through the fire without making a sound. The paralyzing fear was gone. In its place burned a cold, ruthless clarity. The predator was back in the hunt.
2 tactical shadows pushed through the swing doors of the industrial kitchen, red laser beams cutting through the haze. Their heavy boots crunched subtly over the stainless steel thresholds, barrels raised in tight formation. In the high shadows near the service counter, Safiya didn't flinch. Relying on the layout she had memorized down to the millimeter, she reached up and snapped the release valve of the high-pressure steam line over the main stove. A deafening hiss of scalding, blinding white vapor erupted into the narrow aisle. The hitmen flinched, their laser sights scattering erratically through the dense fog. The sudden blast of sound and blinding moisture disoriented them, but before the first shooter could recalibrate, Safiya tipped the heavy basin of cold cooking oil across the slick tile floor beneath their feet. The point man lost his traction, his heavy boots skidding out from under him. That single fraction of a second was all Sang Sun needed. Exploding from the shadows like a panther unleashed from a cage, the syndicate boss closed the distance in absolute silence. His sensory fog had burned away, replaced by the lethal muscle memory of an underworld commander. He sidestepped the point man's wild, suppressed burst, driving the heel of his palm directly under the shooter's jaw with bone-snapping force.
The man's head snapped back, his weapon clattering harmlessly to the ground as he crumpled into the mist. The second assassin spun around, raising his carbine at point-blank range, but Safiya hurled a heavy cast-iron skillet from behind the prep island. The iron struck the gunman's wrist with a sickening crack, knocking his aim wide just as a suppressed shot splintered the cabinetry above. Sang Sun grabbed the disarmed assassin by the throat, sweeping his legs out and slamming him onto the marble prep counter. He pinned the man's chest with an iron grip, twisting the hitman's wrist until his sidearm dropped before pressing the cold steel of his own pistol beneath the intruder's chin. The entire ambush had taken less than 10 seconds. The kitchen fell back into dead, echoing quiet, broken only by the hiss of cooling steam and the gasping breaths of the subdued operative beneath Sang Sun's hand. Sang Sun looked across the counter at Safiya. Her apron was dusted with flour, her dark eyes steady and unblinking, holding a heavy cleaver with relaxed, natural poise. For months, everyone around him had treated his domain like a glass fortress ready to shatter under the slightest touch. Yet here, in the blood and steam, this quiet woman had turned domestic routine into an impenetrable tactical fortress. Sang Sun turned his attention back to the bleeding hitman on the counter, his voice dropping into a lethal, low murmur. "Tell me who gave you the penthouse security codes, or you won't live to see the sunrise over my docks." The rain beat down relentlessly against the corrugated steel roof of Hangar 4 at the Incheon docks. Inside, Chief of Operations Han Jin-woo paced beside 2 armored transport vans, barking frantic orders into a burner phone, while his private guards loaded crates of bearer bonds and falsified port manifests. He was counting the minutes until his cargo freighter departed for international waters, convinced that Sang Sun's lifeless body was currently growing cold in the penthouse. The heavy sliding doors of the hangar groaned open. The sound did not bring the victorious return of his strike team. Through the thick mist and cold drizzle stepped Sang Sun, draped in a long charcoal coat, flanked by 4 of the syndicate's most loyal district enforcers. Behind him, holding a waterproof leather folio with quiet composure, walked Safiya. Jin-woo froze, the phone slipping from his fingers and clattering against the concrete floor. The color drained entirely from his face. "Boss, you're alive. We heard the penthouse was breached. I was mobilizing our men to secure the perimeter." "Save your breath, Jin-woo." His voice cut through the ambient roar of the storm with terrifying clarity. He didn't raise his voice, yet every man in the hangar lowered their weapons in instinctual dread. Sang Sun gestured slightly with his hand. Safiya stepped forward, unzipping the folio and tossing a stack of encrypted flash drives and audited bank ledgers directly onto the hood of the nearest armored van. 300 billion won siphoned through shell corporations in Macau, 72 falsified shipping manifests, and the personal security clearance codes that allowed 4 hitmen into my private elevator. Jin-woo fell to his knees, his hands shaking violently as the full weight of his failed coup crushed him. "Please, Sang Sun, I built this empire with you. You were broken after the bombing. You were unfit to lead. I did what was necessary to protect the syndicate." Sang Sun stopped inches from where Jin-woo knelt in the grime. He reached down, gripped the gold viper pin from Jin-woo's lapel, the symbol of second-in-command authority, and ripped it free, letting the torn fabric flutter to the wet floor. "I was in pain, Jin-woo," he whispered, his eyes burning with cold, absolute authority. "You mistook my suffering for weakness, but my mind has never been clearer than it is tonight." He turned his back on the disgraced traitor, stepping toward his waiting black sedan as his enforcers moved in to seize Jin-woo and seal the hangar doors. "Strip him of his assets and his name," he commanded without looking back. the Golden Viper Syndicate answers to only one head.
By sunrise, the rain had cleared, leaving the glass skyline of Seoul washed in pale, crystalline gold. Inside the triplex penthouse, the traces of the midnight ambush had vanished completely. The damaged panels were replaced, the kitchen counters gleamed with quiet order, and the heavy atmosphere of terror that had haunted the estate for over a year had dissolved into a profound, gentle calm. The hum of the ventilation was balanced, the light was soft, and the endless ringing that had tortured Sang-sun's mind had finally subsided into absolute peace. In the master study, the senior domestic staff and head butler Kang stood in a neat, respectful line, their heads bowed in silence. Sang-sun sat behind his obsidian desk, no longer coiled in defensive fury or drowning behind dark glasses. For the first time since the bombing, his posture was entirely relaxed, his gaze clear, focused, and steady. Standing quietly at the center of the room, her hands folded over her clean apron, was Safiya. Sang-sun looked down at a set of heavy, gold-embossed clearance documents resting on the desk, then rose to his feet. He walked around the table, the rhythmic stride of his steps echoing with restored authority, and stopped before her. 12 people entered this home and saw only a monster to run from, Sang-sun said, his voice deep, calm, and free of the harsh strain that once defined it. You entered and saw the truth. You stood your ground in the dark, you protected this sanctuary, and you gave me back my mind. He picked up a heavy, engraved brass keycard, the master clearance to the entire estate, security grid, and household accounts, and placed it into Safiya's steady hands. From this day forward, Sang-sun announced, looking past her toward Butler Kang and the assembled staff, Safiya has full, undisputed authority over this estate. Her word on the operations, security protocols, and welfare of this household is my own. No one questions her orders. Butler Kang bowed deeply, a visible wave of relief and genuine respect washing over his face. Understood, boss. Safiya looked down at the key in her palm, then met Sang-sun's gaze. There was no boastful pride in her eyes, only the same unwavering, grounded warmth that had broken his cycle of destructive paranoia. I will keep the peace, sir, she said softly, offering a respectful, measured nod. Sang-sun allowed a faint, rare smile to touch the corners of his lips. For 18 months, he had fought an invisible war in a soundproof tomb, but as the quiet morning sun filled the room, the most feared man in Seoul finally closed his eyes and breathed in the impossible silence. What an incredible journey of loyalty, survival, and finding peace in the darkest places. Sometimes the greatest power isn't in sheer force, but in the quiet courage to see beyond the mask someone wears. If you enjoyed Sang-sun and Safiya's story, please give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on so you never miss our next thrilling adventure. Drop a comment below telling us your favorite moment and let us know where in the world are you watching from. We love reading your comments from every corner of the globe. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for the next story.